I'm Angel Millar. I'm the author of The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality, Craftsman, Warrior, Magician, published by Inner Traditions. Thanks for tuning in to Gnostic Warrior. I'm going to take one moment just to talk about some of the initiatic secrets of the book. First of all, I should say that it's a wide-ranging work. My previous books have focused mostly on Freemasonry and related schools of thought such as Rosicrucianism. In this book, I explore everything from Freemasonry, alchemy, Kabbalah, through Islamic Neoplatonism, the martial arts, especially some of the more unusual martial arts such as the Persian martial tradition of Zurkhana, which was influenced by Sufism. I look at Taoist inner alchemy, the cultivation of inner energy, Tantra, sex magic, and even the modern occult tradition, including chaos magic. Now, while the book itself contains a great deal of little-known information on a wide range of esoteric and occult practices, one of the most important things of the book is that it itself forms something of a literary initiation. The book is divided into 3 sections, one for the craftsman, one for the warrior, and one for the magician. And each section contains chapters on the history and myth, ritual, symbols, and esoteric and initiatic practices associated with each of these archetypal vocations. And the point of the book is not merely to collect interesting and little-known information, though that might be valuable in itself, but to pass through the craftsman, the warrior, and the magician to become a more learned, a more whole, and even a more dynamic individual, in touch with all of the different aspects of our own being and capable of going forward in our own lives to embody these archetypes within ourselves and to transform ourselves and our lives for the better.
Welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and here is the interview with Angel Millar.
So how you been doing, Angel? How's life treating you there in New York?
It's good, Mo. It's been busy, but good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know you've been busy with the launch of your new book. When's it's supposed to hit the shelves?
Yeah, February 11, 2020. So a couple of weeks from when we're talking.
Great. And is that set in stone? They pretty good with those dates?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It definitely will be February 11.
Okay. Awesome. And yeah congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've already got advance copies, so I know it's ready to go. So.
Yeah, and as you know, I messaged you on Facebook just a day before this podcast. 2 days, I got your book. Thank you very much to your publisher for sending it. They're always really good about that. And
That's great.
Yeah, it's really, in my opinion, as I was mentioning before we hit record, I believe it's really a book that puts all the initiatic teachings in a simple way, even to people that might be outside of Freemasonry or any type of fraternity or secret society or initiatic system. And then for people that are also Freemasons, where they could kind of understand the mythologies, the history, the mystics, and everything that goes into the initiatic system. And I really love how you blend the craftsman with the warrior and the magician. And if you don't mind, Angel, I'd like to just read the first paragraph of your intro.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Craftsman, warrior, magician. As if an echo reverberating through the millennia, these 3 words remind us of something that lies buried deep in the history of mankind and deep within our own psyche. Primitive by the standards of modernity, when we reflect on them, they nevertheless steer us an awakening to our own potential, mental, physical, and spiritual. In one form or another, the figures of the craftsman, the warrior, and the magician were known to every ancient culture on earth. In some cases, the functions of each could be performed by a single member of a tribe, with herders having to double as warriors, and with responsibility for performing religious or initiatory rituals falling to older members of the tribe or to the head of the household.
Can you explain, the concept of the craftsman, warrior, and magician?
Yeah. Well, the craftsman, warrior, magician are three, we could say even archetypal vocations that have really been with mankind since the very beginning. You can't really have a society without them. You need somebody to make the food or make the tools, somebody who's going to protect society and do the hunting, and you need people who are going to guide society. And of course, in ancient society, that would be the elders, people that have lived long enough to have a kind of a perspective on life and to know that there's something that came before them and something that will come after. But there's been different kind of models of archetypes used in modern society, either in books saying that this is a kind of the archetypal system that we should be thinking about that reflects our psychology, or even in I don't write about this in the book, but even in marketing, there's this whole theory of this 12 archetypes. Personally, I don't think that they are really archetypal. I think there's something wrong with all of these models, and I think if you go back to the true foundations of civilization or of cultures or of tribes, you always find these three: the craftsman, the warrior, and magician. And it's been suggested that throughout the period of a single lifetime, men in particular would go through all of them, and so in youth you would become a craftsman of some kind. And of course, what we forget is that people weren't going to school until they were 16, 18, and then going to college. They were helping their parents in the fields or helping their parents in their profession, in the blacksmith's forge or whatever it was, when they were 4 or 5 years old. So in early life you would become the craftsman. Then when your body was physically matured and you could hunt or fight, then you would be the warrior. And then once you'd gone through all of that, in later life, you would become the one of the elders or the magician in one form or another. And you do find this reflected in later initiatic societies, not consciously, but I think unconsciously it just keeps repeating itself. So in Freemasonry, for example, although I don't think he had any knowledge of ancient tribal society at all, William D. Moore, who used to be the head of or the director of the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Library of the Grand Lodge of New York, I think about 20 years ago, maybe a little more than 20 years ago. He's not actually a Freemason, but he was the director of the Masonic Library there. He made this claim that the different rites in Freemasonry, and we can go into this more, but in Freemasonry you have what's called the craft degrees or craft lodge or blue lodge, and then you have these other two rites, one being the York rite and the Scottish rite, and there are other degrees and rites as well, but they're the main two. And he made this claim, to keep it simple, that the craft degrees or the craft lodge, which is the entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, which everyone goes through, that represents the craftsman. And then he said that the York rite represented what he called the holy warrior, and then the Scottish rite represented the magician, or embodied these archetypes. And I think it's kind of debatable, because you can find elements of all of them in each of these rites. So you find the sort of holy warrior aspect in the Scottish rite, and even in the craft degree there's a sword and so on, which obviously comes out of knighthood or out of chivalry or out of self-defense later on in early modernity. But I think what's important about these three archetypal vocations, as we might call it, is for initiation in the modern age, is not only that it just somehow keeps kind of repeating itself or infiltrating itself into these different sort of rites and fraternities and societies, but this number three also you find it very much in different rites and societies. So you have 3 degrees in craft Freemasonry. You have 3 degrees in Martinism, which is a kind of Christian esotericism, and even in something like Wicca, you have 3 degrees as well. And Rene Guénon, the traditionalist, said that all of these degrees will always be reducible to the number 3, which he saw as representing, I think, birth, life, and death, or that kind of thing. So I think that is why you kind of have this structure repeating. There's something archetypal about it, and it just keeps on reappearing in different ways. Although most of the people that are involved in esotericism are not necessarily conscious of this.
Sure. And would you say the warrior aspect, not a lot of people also are aware that, prior to our modern era, and especially here in the United States, a lot of us were warriors. You were going to be a warrior when you grew up to a certain age, and there was a certain way that you were raised in society. And it was like, we were an individual, but we were part of a whole clan or a tribe. And then, of course, part of that is you had to be ready for war and whatever aspect that might be. And in our modern era, we really don't have that, here. I grew up in, the United States, and I know you grew up over the pond.
Right.
But you didn't have that as well, right, in your side of the equation?
No, we don't have the draft. We haven't had it for decades. But at one point, obviously, and not really that long ago. I mean, less than a century ago, it just would have been a given that if there was a war, you would be called up and you would fight and probably die. And I think, with World War I, things became industrialized and mechanized to such a degree that men were really just frankly just sent to die, to run against the machine guns of the other side and to be mowed down, because the objective was to run out the opponent's bullets. And it was just absolute carnage in World War I. And in the Battle of the Somme, for example, there were 57,000 casualties on the British side on the first day of the battle, and around about 20,000 deaths on the British side on day one. So wow. It was an industrial scale of slaughter, really, but which obviously took warfare to sort of new lows in a way, and really re-engineered warfare, because it was no longer us with our swords against the other side with their swords, or our guns and bayonets, or whatever it might be, or our bows and arrows, or one guy from our side fighting against one guy from the other side, the two strongest of each side. But it was industrialized entirely. But it's absolutely right that for men in particular, warfare was always kind of on the horizon, or some kind of self-defense was always on the horizon, and you had to be ready throughout for that. Throughout thousands and thousands of years, life was unstable, and there were no Geneva conventions, and there were no media making sure that there wasn't any torturing going on. That was all just a part of life for many, many people, or the threat of that was always present, for sure.
Yeah, and I think if we look at our era, we're kind of the first, different tribes that are, intermingled, where we're learning to get along, but we still have that warrior aspect within us, whether that be, you grew up in the ghetto and you've got to fight to survive, which is a common aspect. And even I didn't grow up in the ghetto, kind of a lower middle class area, but it was kind of the same thing. You had to fight to survive, or you were going to be picked on, you were going to be bullied. And I think this is kind of, it's inherent in us. And what I find fascinating, you're also a fellow practitioner of martial arts. I believe Kung Fu, is that your style?
Yeah, that's right.
Correct. And, mine's Hapkido. But what I find interesting now is just this boom where it's, there's still, of course, wars going on, and, people are being, flying and being shipped overseas and so forth. And, good
Yeah.
men and women are dying. But in the same aspect, the people that are staying here, where some of the people are channeling that warrior, that energy we have inside into martial arts. And I didn't get
Yeah.
into it till I was much older, and I know you were younger. But talk about your philosophy in regards to martial arts, how that's played a role in your life, with your path, and then also in the initiatic societies.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I'll come back to that in a second, but
Sure.
I would just make this observation as well that, there's in our society where violence is frowned upon, the warrior is looked down upon and seen to be this like horrible, horrible thing, and we're told that we have to be peaceful and loving all the time. Many of the people who say that and who have that attitude are among the most aggressive people you could ever possibly meet. And I think that when you don't exercise this aggression through the body, people end up exercising it through the intellect, and the intellect becomes incredibly violent and vindictive and spiteful. And you only have to go onto social media to see that people are out for blood, all of the time, every day, are going onto social media and fighting and trying to ruin people's lives and ruin their careers and so on. So, but most of them would say that they're very peaceful people and that they're just doing it for humanity or whatever. And I think that is what happens when you don't understand the warrior, and you won't prepare yourself physically for a situation. You preemptively become violent intellectually, and you go after people, which is just in a way just as bad, I think, if not worse in some cases. But the warrior is, it's necessary for us to cultivate healthy aggression, and to do that physically and to train our bodies physically. In regard to sort of more esoteric and more mystical things, personally speaking, I would say that you undoubtedly know about inner energy, or what the Chinese call qi. It's been called other things in other civilizations, but this cultivation of an inner energy, and personally, you see this particularly with yoga now, where you can do it through meditation and so on. And I've done this for a long, long time, and in my experience, the cultivation of qi, or inner energy, is much easier when your body is strong and the muscles are strong than when you don't practice any kind of physical training. From my experience, there's a definite relationship there. But beyond that, the warrior has its own kind of mysticism and its own ethic and so on. And you find this across the globe, everything from Islamic chivalry, or what's called futawa, which translates literally as young manhood, but it's the code of chivalry for the Muslim warrior, to, of course, Christian chivalry, to Shaolin Kung Fu and other martial arts, and very often at the highest levels of the warrior, you find aspects of not only ethics but also meditation, philosophy, an orientation towards meditating on death and recognizing impermanence and so on. And in religion, of course, this is absorbed and becomes part of the mythology. So you have the war in heaven in Christianity. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Godhead Krishna reveals his celestial form with millions and millions of heads and millions of arms and millions of legs and millions of torsos and so on. He reveals his celestial form to his disciple on the battlefield just before they're about to go into battle. And his disciple Arjuna actually tells Krishna prior to this that he doesn't want to fight in battle. It's going to mean he's going to end up killing his extended family that are on the other side. And quite the opposite of this sort of peaceful, pacifistic Jesus figure that we associate with spirituality. Krishna, the Godhead, tells Arjuna that no, you have to fight, but then reveals how everything is impermanent, and that even when he's slaughtering the other side, that it's all just, in a sense, part of this cosmic play, and really it's Krishna doing everything, and he shouldn't think that he's doing anything at all, in a sense. So to sum up, there is this strange connection between the warrior and mysticism and transcendence, as there is with other vocations as well. So.
Yeah, this chi, this fire, when I was younger, looking back at what I know now, based on the secret teachings, the Masonic teachings, and the various authors, I know if I was able to channel it properly, if I was taught by either through an initiatic system or through a father that knew how to properly raise his son and to channel that energy, I would have channeled it to a different path. And I would think that I look back now being, a black belt and going through this system and getting in fights all my life, and thank God I didn't die, right?
Yeah.
I did not know how to fight, but I thought I did, and once I went into martial arts, it really puts it in perspective, because you're fighting with guys that can kill you, and they don't.
Yeah.
They teach you that. And it was really humbling to just essentially get my ass kicked, right? And get hit hard and go, wow, I don't really know how to fight. And, and just to see the respect and to learn hierarchy and different things that I didn't really get taught before. I was always that rebel that was like, screw this, I had that hard home life, alcoholic parents, and just like, screw everything, and in the end I was screwing myself, right?
Yeah,
but
of course.
In that energy, I kept that hate. And there's a lot of guys like me that end up where I ended up, with that energy and channeling it in the wrong ways and going down the wrong path. And, knowing that I came back full circle and doing the martial arts thing, I just go, man, if, and I have my kids in it now, and I'm just like, if all kids could get taught this and learn how to channel that, it just would be something great, especially when, not everybody's getting sent to war now, right?
Right. No, exactly. Yeah, and it's really really important, because as you've experienced, and we've all experienced to a greater or lesser degree. I think especially for men, because when there's divorce, typically the child stays with the mother, for example, or the father is working late or is just doing something they shouldn't be doing. That in this day and age, it's very common that young men and boys in particular are not given any guidance at all about how to behave, or if they are, it's sort of this feeling that, well, if you just behave a little bit more like the girls, then that will be great, but you shouldn't act like what we think boys are acting like, because that's very damaging to you, and that definitely doesn't work. And I mean, I'm not saying this as someone who's like super masculine out there fighting all the time or anything like that. I mean, sure. I have very masculine interests, such as martial arts, obviously, but I have interests that are definitely not like that, so like art and so on, and writing.
You were modeling at one time. I mean, you're a good-looking guy, right?
Tiny bit, yeah. Yeah.
So, but again, you're talking to a guy that 10 years ago I would never say that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm confident enough in my personhood, or I could say my manhood. Second next is to call a guy that's a good-looking guy. And to me, it's not just about looks either, brother. So you know what I mean? It's about how someone carries themselves and walking the walk and talking the talk and stuff like that. So,
yeah, definitely. But it's curious when you look at the more developed warriors or the more developed education systems that are able to incorporate the warrior. This is what we would think of in the modern world. There's a side that we would consider to be very feminine and questionable. So Miyamoto Musashi, obviously. Japan's most famous samurai, I think made his first kill when he was around 15, and was absolutely ruthless. He was famous for his fighting skills and his killing of his opponents all the time, but he was also famous for his calligraphy and painting and landscape gardening as well. So, there's this appreciation for beauty as well, and for nature, and for things that we would consider to be rather soft and even effeminate at this day and age. And you look at the samurai uh, sword or the samurai armor. That often on the sheath of the sword, there might be cherry blossoms carved into it, and this kind of thing. Which, if you were to put that on clothing today, you would think that's very effeminate. But I think there is something strange in the modern age, and I'm not trying to do the sort of politically correct thing where let's transcend gender or anything like that. But there is a point where we're very much divided, sort of mentally and physically in the West, but we're also not at all holistic in the sense that we feel we need to be either very feminine, even as a man, let's say, or very, very masculine. But,
Sure.
we all have different sides, and, the warrior actually develops them all in a way that's healthy. So, yeah, you
That's
want to
balanced
practice.
between the two, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's balanced. And not just that, but if you read the Hagakure, for example, the late samurai manual, which is a very bloodthirsty book in parts, but there's one point where he says, well, if you study another way, and so that could be a tea ceremony or painting or calligraphy, but if you study another way, then you should understand your own way of the martial arts and the way of death even more. There's something that connects them, and when you think about it, there is a connection, right, between, let's say, the strokes of the brush in Japanese and Chinese ink painting and the movement of the sword, right? Because you're moving your arm and breathing out as you move. And even in other cultures as well, there's always been a connection between particularly dance and the warrior. So you have the Zulu war dance, or you have the Maui with their sort of dance, but even in the Spartans, the best warriors were the best dancers. But we again would think of dance as being
Female,
quite
feminine.
yeah, quite feminine, not something that men really want to do, and maybe a bit suspect. But there were these connections, and so we kind of separated ourselves, and don't really see how things connect, but all things connect in these like really weird ways. And the longer I live and the more I'm involved in, writing or art or martial arts, the stranger the connections.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, I'm like, you're definitely right, because I come from more of the more masculine side, thinking I'm all a man, but realizing I also had a what would be called a kind of a feminine side to me. And I realize as I get older, you've got to do those things as far as the art or the music and those things that aren't just about, fighting or crafting or building things. You've got to, explore your creative side, the beauty of life, smelling the roses. And it's just this thing that you got to do because you start becoming imbalanced, so
Yeah.
I get it now. And I get what it means to, balance the two halves, the feminine and the masculine that we all have. Because you could say that for the female, because I see that in my wife, because she has the blend of both, and she actually does better than me sometimes, and it's really impressive to see that. So I get exactly what you're saying, and how martial arts helps with that. And then of course the arts, or, pursuing different things that aren't just about being a man, but, are developing your character as a whole. And you become more solid as a person, and some of the best people I have met have been more on the meaning the feminine, non-masculine side on how they approach life, even though they wouldn't be who we could call gay or anything like that, but they just never would get in fights, but they would kick your butt if they had to, just really mellow people. I totally get it right now. And let's talk a little bit, about your book in regards to the symbolism, and how it's not to be taken literal. And a lot of people think that it is, whether they're outside Masonry and some that are within it, and they're not really doing their research.
Yeah. So specifically Freemasonry, or?
Yeah, you could start out with Freemasonry.
Sure. Yeah. So, and when you say not to be taken literally, you're talking about all of the different symbols, like the square and compasses, or something else?
Yeah, pretty much that,
Yeah.
I would say, start with that.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we're going to talk about symbolism more broadly, I think one of the traps that people fall into is not understanding that symbols have a context, right? So let's say, well, let's just take the swastika. Because
Sure.
everyone,
Yeah, let's go to the most
recognizes it.
extreme one. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just go there.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, people will say things like this when they don't have a lot of knowledge, but they have a little bit of knowledge about symbolism. They'll say something like this: "Yeah, the Nazis got the swastika from the ancient Aztecs because it's an ancient Aztec symbol." And it's like, well, they didn't actually get it from there. Right? So you need to know the history of that symbol in the time and the location of the Nazis to understand where they got it from. You can't just randomly pick a society from a couple of thousand years ago in another part of the world and say, "Oh, that's it. Then they're even crazier than I thought," because it makes no sense. Mm-hmm. But the actual history is that was a popular symbol in Europe before World War II. Everybody was using it. You found it everywhere. Rudyard Kipling, the British author, he had it at the front of of every one of his books until the Nazis took over. And you find it on in other books because it was basically considered to be this good luck charm in Europe. Everybody was using it. The Theosophical Society used it, of course. They still do. They've changed it a little bit. It was definitely closer to the Nazi symbol before that they had at the top of their symbol. But it was a completely benign symbol before that, and a very popular one in Europe. And it's been used in Europe for thousands of years. And, was
used a lot in Hinduism as well, right?
Yeah, you find it absolutely there as well. But in terms of where the Germans got it from, it was a popular symbol in Germany and in Europe, and it has a whole history going back into Europe. So if you dig up pottery in parts of Europe, you might find a swastika on it, or an inscription somewhere. You'll find that. So but people don't understand that. Oh, okay, I need to look at the symbol within the context. Or another favorite of mine is they'll say, the swastika is actually an Indian symbol, and even the word swastika is Sanskrit. So that's proof that the Germans took it from India. But the problem with that is, yes, we call it the swastika, which is the Sanskrit word, but they called it the Hakenkreuz, for meaning hooked cross. So it's irrelevant. The Sanskrit name is totally irrelevant to the German swastika, because they didn't even call it swastika. So you can't even say that. You can't make that claim, but people do. So if you're going to look at a symbol, you have to understand it in the context of the time and the place and the people who are using it. And of course, with let's say conspiracy theories, or people that are more prone to thinking in this conspiratorial way, will say things like, there's a triangle on this, music album, or something, or somebody's putting their hands together and making a triangle, whatever that means, some stupid hip hop thing. And then there's a triangle on a window, in a stained glass window in a church somewhere. Therefore, they're both Illuminati, because the triangle is a symbol of the Illuminati, and we're being controlled by this overpowering world-dominating thing. And I see triangles everywhere, so they must be everywhere. But a triangle has meant different things throughout societies and in different cultures and civilizations. It means different things. So again, you have to look at what did it mean to those people. It doesn't mean it's not a universal thing, although there's an element of universality to symbols in that the triangle will never represent, for example, the four elements, right? Because it's got three sides. So the symbol has some kind of relationship to what it's representing. and sort of embodies it in a more simplistic form, but still, what it's representing will be different in each time and place, right? So within Christianity, the triangle might mean the Trinity, or would most likely mean the Trinity. Whereas in Freemasonry, a triangle might represent, say, the 3 degrees of Freemasonry. So it can be totally different. And sometimes there might be some similarity, but often there won't be. But so getting back to Freemasonry. So Freemasonry emerged out of the British Stonemasons Guild, the beginning or close to the beginning of the 18th century, though it certainly goes back before that. And you find the fragments of early rituals that were adopted and developed later on. You find those in the 17th century. There's quite a few fragments and recordings of short rituals from the 17th century. And then even back about 600 years ago to just around 1400 AD, you still find these very quite elaborate myths of the Stonemasons Guild that in some sense are esoteric, or at least very strange. There's a whole mythology about how geometry was brought to England from Pythagoras and via ancient Egypt. And there are these other strange scenes where these figures are building these 2 pillars, one of marble and one of metal, in case there's a flood or a fire, and they've inscribed all of the arts on it, and in the hope that one of them will survive, so that mankind will still have the arts and sciences that they developed. And later on, you find 2 pillars in a Masonic lodge as well. So there's some kind of relationship to it, although it was hugely developed over those centuries. But so the basic symbols of Freemasonry, or craft Freemasonry, or Blue Lodge Freemasonry of the Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason, the first 3 degrees, is very largely based on geometry and stonemasonry. And I'm sure most of your listeners will be aware of the square and compasses symbol. The square obviously is for drawing right angles, and the compasses is for drawing circles. And at least in terms of architecture and the architect. And within Freemasonry, the square really represents more like the material world, the earth, and then the compass would represent more like the spiritual world. But so
sure,
everything
we could say that the pyramid also could represent that to some people as well, right? The spiritual.
Yeah, you could. I mean, pyramids are not necessarily something of that much interest in Freemasonry, although within the 19th century, there was a kind of fashion for pyramids within Freemasonry, at least within if they were going to build a new building, there might be some reference to a pyramid in it. But it's not actually in degrees or anything. But sure, this idea of this ascent up a pyramid, or the ascent towards the heavens, definitely suggests transcendence from the material and going towards the spiritual.
And what does it mean to say God as the creator, and who is the craftsman, or in Masonic terms, a great architect and grand geometrician?
Yeah. So who is the great architect?
What does it mean? What is, as far as the Freemasonic terms, to someone out there that might not be a Freemason, they're interested, they're listening to this.
Yeah.
What does that mean in the initiatic system?
Yeah. So in Freemason, or regular Freemasonry, let's say, a candidate is required to have a belief in God, or in a supreme being, meaning God. And Freemasonry talks about the nature of deity, the nature of God, the nature of the creator, through the geometry and the building tools. So God is conceived of as a great architect. So he is the one who has designed the universe, and he's designed it with certain rules in mind. And you can detect what these are through through architecture and building, for example. And this isn't something that is unique to Freemasonry. If you go back to ancient Greece, the philosopher Plato talked about the deity as a craftsman and spoke about the world and the material universe being formed out of these geometric solids, or what we might think of as building blocks. And each of these solids had a different shape. So the solid associated with fire was a pyramid, and the solid associated with earth was a cube, and there were 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. But they all had this structure, each one having their own solid, their own sort of building block. And then because they come together in different forms, in different combinations, that's how you get the different aspects or the different things of material existence as we would understand it, according to Plato. So these ideas are not new. They reflect something very ancient. But yeah, that's a really how Freemasonry conveys this idea of a supreme creator or supreme mind in the universe.
Would you say the higher degrees, maybe the Scottish Rite? I believe you're not a member of the Scottish Rite. But would the higher degrees and maybe different orders and secret societies that are affiliated with Freemasonry, would you say they would be more esoteric? And tell us about your experience on your path with the esoteric. Has that been more of your kind of own research, or what's going on there?
So I took the York Rite, and I took the Order of the Temple, which is at the very top of the York Rite, which is seen to be equivalent of the 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite. First of all, let's tackle the notion of higher degrees. In the US and in Great Britain, the quote-unquote higher degrees are actually officially regarded as further degrees. You can take them if you want. You don't have to. The highest degree is really, in America, is considered to be the Master Mason degree. And in Great Britain, the highest degree is regarded as being the Royal Arch degree, which is in the York Rite. And that's considered to be the completion of the Master Mason degree. In England, the Royal Arch is interesting. I was mentioning the Platonic solids idea, and this is something that is very much found in England in the Royal Arch degree, not in America, actually. The Scottish Rite degrees and some of the York Rite degrees really owe their origins to 18th century Freemasonry in France and Germany. You had this explosion of different rites and different competing Masonic jurisdictions and factions in France and Germany once it had taken root in there from Great Britain. And those rites were often influenced by alchemy, Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, Christian mysticism, and so on. And so, for example, in the Scottish Rite degree, you have the so-called Rose Croix degree. And the Rose Croix degree, whether people like it or not, is very influenced by Catholicism, but it's also clearly and obviously influenced by Rosicrucianism. So the main symbol, for example, is the rose at the center of a cross. There's a pelican feeding its young with its own blood, which you find in alchemy, and so on. So all of these rites that were competing, most of them just collapsed and fell away, sort of organically. But many of the rituals were absorbed into these other rites, most notably the Scottish rites. Scottish Rite degrees come mainly from France, and they were compiled together. And in America, Albert Pike elaborated upon them and expanded them and made them much larger than they were originally. And the question is, are they more esoteric? Well, in a sense, they're more obviously alchemical and hermetic, but I wouldn't say that they were more esoteric, meaning they have some kind of inner meaning. I would actually say that if you studied the craft degrees, you probably find things that are at least as esoteric as any of the higher degrees. And the reason being, really the craft degrees have a history of about 600 years behind them. And it's certainly true that, 600 years ago, they did not exist. But you still have this mythology of stonemasonry, which is quite strange. And this mythology developed, and then the stonemasons developed these rituals later on, and then they were expanded upon during the early 18th century. So you have a long history of this sort of organic development, and I think you could study those for the rest of your life, and, and certainly, and many Masonic historians and thinkers have found similarities between those rituals and the rituals of many other cultures and societies. And sometimes, sometimes the connections are suspicious and not historical connections. But if you're looking at as is often claimed to be the case, but if you look at them, philosophically, there's definitely a lot of philosophical relationship between the two, or symbolic relationships. There seem to be parallels that you find in many other cultures, and even last week I was with a few different Freemasons, and on different days, and I think I must have heard 3 different convincing theories that Freemasonry originated from totally different cultures all around the world, but they can't all be true. Sure. And the thing is, there's no historical evidence for these claims, but the parallels between the symbolism is really striking. But that's in a way what makes Freemasonry both interesting and in my view even maybe more esoteric than the other higher degrees, because when you look at the let's say the Rose-Croix degree, which is obviously it's influenced by Catholicism. They used to quote the Catholic Mass in it, the Latin Mass in it, and traditionally one of the officers would be dressed in a very Catholic manner. I don't know if they still do that, but it's also influenced by Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism as well. But once you look at that degree, I don't think you could look all over the world and find such striking parallels of symbolism or philosophy as you do between, say, the first 3 degrees of the craft Freemasonry and Confucianism or Islam or Christian mysticism or whatever, or the Aztecs or whatever have you, or the ancient Egyptians. And so in a way, I think that it may be that the craft lodge is actually more esoteric, but that's just me.
Yeah, and if we look at the world's greatest philosophers, and then if we go into Freemasonry as far as the world's greatest Freemasonic thinkers and developers of the craft, and you look at other different orders and societies and different philosophies, it seems like the greatest thinkers that are held up, they're really people that take a little bit of everything, and they seem to honor the various initiatic systems, kind of like your book. You didn't just write about Freemasonry. Yeah. You kind of dwelled, and I think that's really important. And if we look at Freemasonry, it's always kind of been, international per se, meaning it's been in different lands. And then I think kind of the nationalist pride sometimes maybe, or wartime, or different factions fighting who might leave it to where, hey, we created this, or, my tribe created this and we brought this here, where it's like everybody kind of has a hand in it. Once you research it, it's just like everybody. And then you look at Freemasonry now, and it's kind of a mixture of the different religions and different, sometimes, whether you could say Gnostic or pagan rites or Hermetic or so forth, that are kind of incorporated, and different thinkers would redo the rites, or the initiation rites and the degrees and so forth. And like you had said, you had went through your system and didn't feel like you needed to go to the Scottish Rite. But since you've already been through that, you studied the Scottish Rite, you've written this great book, you've studied, you researched the initiatic systems over the past few thousand years. What are your thoughts in regards to our modern system, and do you feel that it could be improved upon? Because when I look at a lot of the ancient initiatic rites, they were much more difficult and much more personal for the initiate.
Yeah, and when you say our modern system, are you talking about Freemasonry or about
let's
cult world?
Freemasonry. I would say Freemasonry. I don't have experience in Freemasonry and the initiatic systems, but I've studied just like you, and it seems like everything is done pretty much in a lodge and with study.
Yeah. Well, I think regardless whether it's Freemasonry or whether it's something like the Golden Dawn or the Ordo Templi Orientis or Sufism or even martial arts, the system is definitely important. But I think even more important than that is really the people that are involved in it. Because you could have the most complete initiatic system that you could ever possibly want, let's say. But if the people involved in it are uneducated, they don't understand it, they're not particularly inspiring people, they don't really have anything going on in their lives besides this, you probably won't get very much out of that system. On the other hand, you might have another system that isn't quite as good. Maybe it's a lot simpler. It doesn't have everything. But if you have the right people in it who are intelligent, who are inquisitive, have the right morals, who are good at guiding you and cultivating you and steering you in a certain direction on your journey, then that system is actually going to be much better. And the problem with initiatic organizations today is that they don't always attract the best quality people. They often or generally attract people that have a slightly above average intellect, but I often find that people in different initiatic systems are kind of stuck in a way. They found something to sort of occupy their mind, and they found a kind of belief system that they can quote, but it seems to create as much of a barrier as it does a pathway for them. It's supposed to be a pathway, a journey, but it seems to lock a lot of people into a certain narrow-minded way of thinking. And I'm not trying to encourage sort of rampant universalism where anything goes, but it seems that with a lot of these systems or a lot of these groups, it actually stops people from thinking, or it encourages them to think just enough, but not really enough to have a great understanding, which is unfortunate. But I think in regard to Freemasonry, I would actually say if any changes were to be made, it might actually benefit from being made a little simpler and having fewer degrees, and not to beat up on the Scottish Rite at all, because I'm not a member. But there are one or two degrees where Kabbalah is mentioned, but for example, and Kabbalah is a big deal in esotericism today, or maybe not as much as it was 30 years ago, but Kabbalah is still a big deal, and people are very fascinated by it. But for me personally, if you want to understand Kabbalah, you can buy 500-page books on Kabbalistic philosophy from rabbis today, and 100, 200, 300 years ago, you really couldn't do that. That was just impossible. And
you would have to get initiated and be taken under someone's wing.
To know even know the most basic aspects of the Kabbalah, you would have to be initiated into a really secret society, and whatever you got would be would be enormous compared to somebody who wasn't in those societies that wouldn't know anything, And even about 25 years ago, I was talking to a Jewish friend of mine, a female Jewish friend, and I asked her. I said, have you heard? Maybe about 30 years ago, I said to her, have you heard of the Kabbalah? And she said, oh my goodness, I can't believe you've heard of the Kabbalah because I'm not Jewish. And she said, but to me, she said, she was amazed that a non-Jewish person had heard of it because she had stumbled across it in a novel, and her parents were really upset that she even knew about it, and her grandfather had told them to stop her from learning about it and this kind of things.
Wow. That was like teaching Gnosticism in a Catholic house, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's right. So, that was, 30 years ago. So, it was really, really secret. Whereas now, for better or worse, it's, I don't think you could learn the Kabbalah by just reading books, but the amount of learning or the amount of writing that you could come across or could get a hold of on Kabbalah it's enormous, and it's authentic Kabbalah from written by rabbis and Kabbalistic Jewish Kabbalistic scholars, but so to me, a few references in a ritual, is that enough? And I don't think it is particularly. So
what do you?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to while it's on the top of my head, talk about the current state of affairs of Freemasonry. I know you're heavily involved, and you're doing really well as far as I believe being a living stone, what a Freemason's supposed to be, and that's living the philosophy, right? So I think you agree with me in that aspect. What about Freemasonry just not accepting anybody? Where they've got to be proven somewhat, not necessarily, just they got to be a good moral character, but they've got to be actually a living stone, someone that's kind of they've proven themselves a little bit more. And then that would create more philosophical lodges where they're actually doing things and getting things done in the world, and it's more exciting. And there's guys like you writing books, and this guy's doing this, and it's just this more livelihood. And then living the fire and channeling it, and a martial artist and this and that. And I think that would be more attractive to non-Masons who are of quality character, who are of similar interest, as opposed to just accepting anybody and you just go to the lodge and, and I know we've discussed that before where, it really depends on the lodge, on the education and the inspiration that you're going to get as a Mason. Yeah.
Well, Freemasonry, is really the biggest initiatic society out there, and I'm not saying that makes it better or worse than any other initiatic society, but most very well known occult and esoteric societies probably have no more than a couple of hundred active members across the globe, maybe 1,000 active members across the globe, whereas Freemasonry has, I forget how many, but it's maybe 3 to 6 million, maybe more than that. It's difficult to know exactly. So it's huge in comparison, even though it's the numbers have declined. But certainly in the past, during the 20th century, there was a lot of people joining because they've been at war and they came back from war and they just wanted to be around other guys and have that sort of spirit of camaraderie and, guys together. And they weren't necessarily particularly interested in Freemasonry, though, the very strong structure of Freemasonry might have appealed to them because, you had to do certain things at certain times, be in a lodge and stand up when you were told to stand up, or sit down when you were told to sit down. Sure. So you had that sort of, strict structure that maybe appealed as well. But certainly, during the 20th century, in America at least, and probably in Great Britain, generally guys were not joining because they had a real interest in symbolism or mysticism or mythology. It was, just to be around the guys or whatever. And and have barbecues or whatever. But I would say honestly, over the last 10 years, and in particular, really over the last 5 years, it's really changed, and really changed in just an incredibly striking way. And I would say that nearly everyone who joins today is joining because they have an interest in symbols or mythology or mysticism or the esoteric, or at least something like psychology or self-improvement. And I don't think people aren't really joining because they want to be
find
around
out the
other
secrets of the
guys
world, or
yeah. So that's really changing, and that's kind of reflected, maybe not so much in the lodge experience. My lodge focuses a lot more on the esoteric, and they would probably say, quite honestly, that I haven't been enough lately. I've missed a few meetings, but just my life has been a little crazy lately. But they try to put on at least one talk every meeting on some subject related to the esoteric. And the last one, which I actually missed, was on alchemy. So it's pretty typical there. But most lodges that probably wouldn't happen. But one thing that is happening, you have all these Masonic cons now, which was started by a guy called Brian Simmons in Massachusetts, and they're usually sort of 1-2 a day conferences where there'll be lots of different Masonic speakers, different authors on Freemasonry, and different kind of events going on. And I've been to quite a few, and they're very, very upbeat, very high energy, a lot of focus on, the esoteric and symbolism and this kind of thing, and history as well. But so that's been a huge deal, and now there's an esoteric con, which is focusing more on esoteric Freemasonry, or more on the esoteric world in general, mostly aimed at Freemasons. So it's really changing in that regard, and there's definitely a much more openness now to focusing on the esoteric and on spirituality and symbolism. But I'll just say this as well. When I first joined, which was about almost 20 years ago, it was about 18 years ago now. I went through the craft degrees, and in my lodge, I've changed lodges now, but in my lodge at the time, I wasn't saying it was horrible, but there was a talk every month. One of them was on men's health. I mean, I think that's pretty relevant. I'm okay going to a talk on men's health. And then there was one by a fireman. I was less interested in that. And after a few months of having talks, none of which were on Freemasonry or mythology or anything that seemed to be relevant to what we were doing, I said to the master of the lodge, would you mind if I gave a talk on Freemasonry, which was kind of a gutsy thing to do in retrospect. But he said, sure. And, I did. And I would say I think I approached it correctly. And that was, I didn't know as much as everybody else on Freemasonry, obviously. Some guys have been there for like 20, 30, 40 years. So I didn't go in and try and lecture them about, okay, this is what you're doing wrong, or this is what you don't know about Freemasonry. So, I gave a talk on stonemasonry and mason's marks and runes, and it was a historical talk, but I talked a little bit about the philosophy and sort of related it to Freemasonry, and didn't make the claim that, oh, yeah, this is where it's all from. It was sort of like, this is something historically interesting around stonemasonry, even prior to the earliest myths that we know of, and there's some relationship between that philosophy and the philosophy of Freemasonry, but without making any wild historical claims. And but that's not really the point. So the point I was going to make is, one of my friends in the lodge, a guy I clicked with and was friends with for a long time, he said to me, look, we haven't had a talk on Freemasonry in lodge for a long time, so everybody's going to be thrilled and everybody will be like really supporting you. And he said, but there's one old guy, you know who he is. He comes here, he makes all these jokes, and he's not going to be interested. Look, if he falls asleep, just ignore him. Everybody else is going to be thrilled for you. And I did, and everybody loved it. But at the end of the talk, this old guy came up to me made a point of coming up to me, and he said to me, in effect, that was great, and we need more of that. And you think to yourself, why does everybody think that he has no interest in Freemasonry? He's been going there for like 4 decades. 4 decades. I mean,
He did the opposite.
Yeah. But and why is he goes there and sort of makes sort of stupid wisecracks or whatever? Because he's basically bored. No one goes to a Masonic lodge and doesn't have an interest in these things. But what I find is this sort of weird sort of shyness, which I think comes from that generation and the generation before it, where they joined with guys who really were in it just to smoke cigars and have barbecues, but they were the ones who were actually interested in it and stuck around. But because they experienced all that nonsense, they kind of feel that, well, they shouldn't really express that they're interested in mythology or, alchemy or psychology or whatever it is. But in my experience, most members of a Masonic lodge actually are interested in that. But they're just not coming forward with saying it's this very strange thing. But with the younger guys, they're joining and they're definitely making it known that that's why they're interested in it. Why else would you want to join a Masonic lodge in this day and age? So it's kind of interesting, but it's definitely changing.
I agree. I agree. I've been, podcasting for the last 10 years. I've interviewed, many Freemasons and, my research on it, and then also seeing, friends on Facebook. I really see, the Freemasons really holding themselves up with good moral and ethical behavior as far as the most part. It seems like all the Freemasons, they represent themselves good, they dress nice, and they're trying to do well and learn it. And you see a lot of younger Freemasons. And also on the other side, as far as the, what lodge would it be in African American Freemasonry?
Yeah, Prince Hall, probably. Yeah, there are other ones, but Prince Hall is the main one, yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be having a growth explosion when you look at that.
Yeah, it could well be. Yeah, I don't know about the numbers, but yeah, it could well be. Yeah.
Sure. What's interesting is, I looked at researching Freemasonry. I think there's only one Grand Lodge that just won't accept anybody, and I think that's in Russia. They actually have it on their website. They do not accept ignorant Freemasons. I think they have like a total of a few hundred, or I'm not sure, but last time I checked, because I was just researching, I was interested, just to see what they do in Russia, and I went on the website, and it says no ignorant Freemasons are allowed in the order. So it's more like an application process, I think. That's kind of interesting. But what I see now is, with Facebook, online, especially these podcasts, you mentioned these Masonic cons, these conferences, and also you guys networking together, the people that are actually doing things, writing books and talking about the esoteric and educating the younger Masons. It seems like you guys, of course, are also attracting other young Masons. So it would be natural if, you guys get together, 2 or 3, you guys are in a lodge, it's going to attract other good guys. And that energy, that fire, that spiritual energy is just going to be great and keep everything lively, keep you, a guy that's been in it for 20 years and writes books and knows a lot about it, keep coming back to have some fraternity with these guys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really important to have that dynamic, definitely. And I think the Masonic cons have really helped to get the focus back on, the spiritual mythology, the symbolism, and that sort of thing, which has been really, really, really helpful, actually.
And what are your thoughts about, I interviewed on my last podcast, Dr. Nicholas Leos. He's been involved in Freemasonry for several decades. And, he had recently departed from regular Freemasonry, and his, he had some criticisms. He's been involved in international Freemasonry for some years, and he was wanting to be more involved, taking philosophy to the religious side and the political side, not in the aspect of, storming the halls of religion, but more being able to have philosophers and to have scholars talk about these subjects, whether it be in lodge or whether it be with one another in an online forum. What are your thoughts in
Yeah.
regards to politics and religion?
Yeah, Dr. Nicholas Laus rings a bell. I think, is he, I could be totally wrong, but is he involved in Memphis and Mizraim?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I know who he is. Yeah, so, yeah, in regards to regular Freemasonry, which is basically what we mean mainstream Freemasonry. If you're going to walk into a Masonic lodge, it's in America or Britain, it's mainstream Freemasonry or regular Freemasonry. And Memphis and Mizraim is much smaller, and you're going to have to find it through the internet and get in contact with people. And it's considered irregular, so you can't be a member of both. It's a whole complicated thing. But anyway, regardless, yeah. So as in regard to speaking about religion in lodge. Technically speaking about religion or politics is prohibited, but I wrote one book on Freemasonry and connections between Freemasonry and Islam from around 1850 to around 1920. And, that talks about that in different lodges, and you can't really talk about that subject without mentioning Islam. And, I've talked about many other subjects in lodge as well, where I've touched on other religions, maybe Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or Zoroastrianism, and whatever it may be. And, no one has ever told me I can't do that. And no one has ever felt that it was questionable or I shouldn't do that. And I think that, this prohibition against talking about religion or politics, it's really more about somebody saying, well, my religion is better than your religion, or I don't like your religion, or I don't like that religion, or I think that religion is really bad. That's really what's prohibited. Or somebody going in and saying, other religions are great, but I've got the real one. You should join my religion. That sort of proselytizing or attacking other people's religions is what's prohibited. It's not actually talking about religion. That's not really prohibited. If I were to go and talk about states of consciousness in Zen Buddhism, nobody would say to me that would be prohibited in a Masonic lodge. Nobody would even think of that. So I don't think it's an issue personally.
Yeah, that makes sense. I talked to you before. We've talked about religion as well. And what about politics? It seems like now more than ever, especially when you see, we talked earlier and you mentioned on the internet, you have these people very emotional, yelling, they have no reason. And it always seems like, that the fringe seems to grab a hold of the mic, and they're the loudest, yelling the loudest. And the guys that are more philosophical and have reason and maybe more truth and actually have the facts together, they're to the sidelines and they're, yelled over. What are your thoughts about politics? Some of the first Freemasons in the United States were involved in politics. So it seems like it was, and I know there's people involved in politics that are also Freemasons as well, and you don't have to disclose your membership and so forth. What are your thoughts in regards to politics and getting involved and maybe instilling some of these values that you learn in the lodge in the halls of Congress or wherever in your local town?
Yeah, well, I'm increasingly skeptical of politics, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean,
it's something you're not going to do otherwise, right?
No. And I find that, politics is incredibly divisive, and I don't think this is a shock to anyone or anything that people haven't observed. But in at least in Britain and America, and maybe Canada as well, I also lived for a while. Most people are not voting because they have a great love of their political party. They just dislike the other party more, and you can tell that's the case in the kind of ads that are run by the presidential candidate or the political parties in Great Britain or wherever. Their adverts are 99% about how terrible the other guy is, and then maybe a little bit of promising that they'll make make the world perfect for everyone. But even when they are speaking positively about what they're going to do, it's always so vague, because they know that if whatever they do, it will isolate someone, right? So you can't say things like, I definitely will improve education, but that's going to mean putting up taxes, because then someone's going to be offended, someone will be upset and not vote for them, right? So it's always sort of vague. We're going to make things better, but then they never tell you how. But so politics is largely negative, and it's largely about what the other guy is doing wrong and not what they're doing right. And the whole political movements are, based around, taking to the streets, complaining, while other people are outside of politics are finding solutions to it. And I think actually the way forward in the West is to be less political and to be more focused on trying to create solutions to the problems, and that requires creativity. I don't know if you know, but there's actually not just IQ. Everybody knows about IQ, the intelligence quotient, but there are other Qs as well. One of them is the CQ, or creativity quotient. How creatively we can think. And over the last 4 decades, that's actually declined in America, and probably in Britain and elsewhere in the West. And I think you can see that people are very fixated on politics and on screaming about the problems, but aren't really able to do anything in their own lives to be creative. And creative, it doesn't mean, doing a painting or making a piece of music. It means being able to tackle problems and find solutions to them that might be novel or what other people haven't thought about. So I don't really have a lot of hope for politics, personally speaking.
And then what about here in America, you've been living here for quite some time. It's a beautiful place. It's almost like musical anarchy, right? You just have all these different people and races and religions and creeds and so forth, and we somehow all get along for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And then we mentioned people on the fringe seem to have the loudest voice, but for the most part, we live in peace in most areas. I know some people have it rougher wherever you might live, but in any event, what do you feel about as far as uniting on a philosophical concept? Not necessarily saying, like right now we have Freemasonry, and it has all these different. You have the United Grand Lodge of England. You have the Scottish Rite. You have all these different factions and different secret societies. Do you ever believe that there can be unification, maybe, or it's always going to be this mishmash and different philosophical beliefs, and there's never going to be a consensus? When I look back over history, there seems to be that at times the philosophers would get together and have some type of consensus on how the philosophies were going to go forward, on how to, essentially operate their culture and, for their children and their grandchildren and their future, ancestors and so forth. And it was really important to them to be involved in that process. And of course, I get what you're saying. I'm not a politician. I'm far from it. And I don't even vote, to be honest with you, because I'm so disillusioned with that system. But do you believe that this will just continue and we're just going to kind of just do our own thing? Angel's going to go, he's going to write his books and do his thing at his lodge. This guy's going to do his thing over here, and this guy's going to be involved in this order. And we're kind of just always doing our own thing, but there's never any type of organized effort to really improve the society which we live. It's just going to the people on the fringe with the loudest voice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in regard to, people getting along in America, that's largely true. And I think that, when we meet people individually and we get to know people, we like them. One of the problems with politics is that we perceive people in terms of groups, and we don't like those groups, right? So, even let's say from the Democrats, the Democrats, who would probably say they embrace more people than the Republicans, there are still people they don't like, right? And one of the big problems is that, white working class people have been pretty much left behind in regards to the left. It was really the left that represented them, but now they're pretty much disenfranchised from that political party, and then they vote for the opposite party as well, and everyone is mystified why that might happen. But that is the problem with politics, that we might get on well with people one-to-one or in a personal relationship, or we meet them on the street and we like them. But as soon as politics enters the picture, we start thinking of them as a sort of voting bloc, or as some kind of political bloc, or as some kind of bloc that might be against us, and we no longer like them. And that's why politics is really so divisive, and I would actually say probably dangerous at this point. And it doesn't sound very sexy that people are muddling on with their own lives, doing their own thing. But the problem with having an overarching philosophy that we're all going to agree with is that ultimately we're not going to. And
well, you could agree not to agree, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's where we're at now. Sometimes.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. But and even when you do have an overarching philosophy. So I guess, everybody would probably say that they believe in democracy and equality. But if you were really to peer inside people's minds, what they mean by those words would probably be totally different in many cases. So, everybody pays lip service to the overarching ideas that can't be questioned. But many people, when they use those terms, are thinking of something totally different to what might be the consensus. So
like when I look in, the reason I talk about that, because there's been an interest recently. I've been writing about the Sons of Ulam, and in other countries, in Islamic countries, they essentially have these councils that are essentially philosophers, and it's my understanding is they have a philosophy. Of course, a lot of these countries, it's Islam, right? It's in Muslim countries, but it's based on the Quran, but on the teachings, and they also inform on the laws. Of course, it's different from ours, but they're all involved in that process. And when I look back at Western societies, we actually had that in different areas. And I know I might be going in an area that you haven't researched lately or might have touched upon, but that's kind of where I was going with that. It wasn't like it really interests me because I've been studying it, and my understanding with the Illuminati or the Illuminati was they were kind of a concept like that, with Adam Weishaupt, the various philosophers, Giuliano Di Bernardo right now. His idea is to get these philosophers together, and it's your thing. We're spiritual stones. We're supposed to be living stones creating a kingdom on earth, right? Solomon's temple, isn't that kind of the idea of being a Freemason? So that was kind of the concept and my understanding of what the Illuminati is about, and also what it is about having some type of system that, philosophers that control the strings rather than people on the fringe, taking us to hell. So.
Yeah. Although, to be honest with you, I think when philosophers get together and decide what direction a country should go in, very often the result is disaster. And I don't mean just philosophers who are read Plato or Aristotle, but technocrats and people and ideologues and people that have an ideology. When they decide, okay, this is how we're going to get to utopia or something pretty close to it, it very often just ends in a disaster. And central planning, maybe you need it to a certain degree, but it doesn't really seem to work. So I'm sort of maybe more in favor of people muddling along and doing their own thing, because one of the things about politics I don't like as well is that people talk about it all the time as if they know what's going on, but I mean, how could you possibly understand all of the intricacies in a political system? Because I mean, right, you get 5 people in a room and there's already some kind of politics between them. One of them doesn't like one that much, or something was said, or something happened. Or you work for a company of 20 people, and there's all kinds of politics and backstabbing going on. And well, when you've got 50 or 100,000 people working in government roles, I mean, how could you possibly understand that? And that's just one country, and now every country is working for and against each other, and it's enormously intricate. And even with the 9/11 and the FBI and the CIA weren't really talking or sharing information right well, and what's happened since then might be a disaster as well. But you have these government agencies responsible for keeping America safe, and they were competing against each other. So it's difficult to understand really what's going on. And the idea that we'll have a philosophy, and the wise men will get together and steer us in the right direction. It doesn't happen, or at least I haven't seen it happen.
You never know. I always I have hope, because when I look at the current state of political affairs, it gets me a little nervous. And as I had mentioned, I'm not into politics right now and so forth. I just wanted to get your opinion because it seems to be at the forefront always here in the United States, and there's not a lot of wisdom going around, and especially when it comes to our politicians. So it just would be great, and again, it would be nice to see, more philosophers kind of running things, but, maybe things happen for a reason.
Yeah, well, I think if you want anyone in charge, it's people that understand the human nature, and that people will make mistakes, and that we're all fallible, and that things don't go to plan. Things never go to plan. And maybe you don't tell those guys what's going on. They just write the policies. Who knows? And that's kind of that brings me to another topic you bring up in your book, and we'll wrap it up here shortly. I know you have to go here. So please explain how, according to Alice Bailey, every nation has its own thought form or spirit, though this is no less true of people's tribes that preceded. That remain distinct from modernity. Yeah, so Alice A. Bailey was a sort of a mystical, esoteric thinker, I think, which was early 20th century, maybe a bit before that. But one of the things she talks about is how every nation has its own egregore, and an egregore is kind of, it's almost like a god in a way. It's like a spirit that is built up through people's thoughts or consciousness or will. And that at the same time has a symbiotic relationship with the people who are creating it, that it affects them and shapes them as well. So, although that's a slightly strange concept, but in occult lodges as well, there's often this idea that the lodge has an egregore, and an occultist would deliberately try and create one. So they might try and create this of energy intellect, and by projecting their will into it and projecting their consciousness into it, and sort of sacrificing a bit of their own energy to it in a sense, with the understanding that then they could draw on this energy at times of need. This doesn't happen in regular Freemasonry, I should point out, but for example, in the Fraternitas Saturni, that Edred Thorson has written about again recently, that's something there, and certainly this has happened more recently in chaos magic as well. But Alice A. Bailey makes the claim that every nation has its egregore. So it seems to imply that the thoughts of the people, or the consciousness of the people, is kind of congealing in a kind of form that then reshapes them, which it seems to be in a way it's sort of true, or at least it's one way of perceiving it, because certainly every nation is different, and civilizations and cultures are different, and we in the West tend to think of all civilizations and cultures as being the same, but they're not the same. And we tend to think of them as having the same political beliefs that we do, which is totally wrong. And the same attitude towards rights and so on. That's totally false. But not only are their philosophical ideas different, their laws will be different, but then their sense of aesthetics will be different, food will be different, and just assumptions about life will be different. So there does seem to be some kind of guiding spirit, whether that's literal or metaphoric, one cannot say.
What I find interesting, if we kind of break that down to the macrocosm per se here in the United States, and I know, you're in New York, I'm here in San Diego, you have such a diverse where it could be literally by almost neighborhood and by city, right? That you could have a spirit thought form.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, there's not far from me, there's a place that's, all of the writing on the shop is Arabic, and it's basically an Arabic neighborhood. It's really not that far, but around it would be other like Greek neighborhoods, and
it just seems to like organically form, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think people, emigrate together, and they want to find people that speak their language. And I know in New Jersey, there's a town that's pretty much all Korean people, and there used to be other neighborhoods in New York that have now faded away, but 50, 60, 70 years ago there was like a German town in Manhattan that's pretty much gone now. It's pretty like one German restaurant left, and Italy is still there, Chinatown is still there. But so neighborhoods are totally different, and obviously when you travel from one state to another, it's completely different.
Yeah, like a different country.
Yeah, really.
They talk different, right?
They talk differently. They have different words sometimes. They have different food, and the landscape is totally different. The heat is different as well. So,
that's what's really beautiful, I think, about the United States as well.
Yeah, definitely.
How we somehow seem to all coexist together. And I've really been thinking about that, and I was just going, it's really the philosophy of commerce and doing business and treating people kind of how we want to be treated. That's kind of like the American way. Of course, that doesn't always work, but I was just like, I do business with every different kind of race and person and religion. And, we all treat each other respectfully as long as I give them what they're paying for and they give me. And then that trust is built. It's just this unique kind of thing, and then I've been involved in martial arts as well here, and just literally everybody from different lines of employment. I was with, corrections officers, DEA, and I'm this guy that used to be in prison, and
wow.
with guys with different religions, and then, a Muslim family, and, I grew up Catholic and so forth, and they invited us to a picnic, and it was just cool. They kind of accepted us, and we got along based on kind of this system we have here that's kind of like beautiful anarchy, like I'd said, and you talk about, hey, I just kind of want to leave it how it is, It's unique. Some of the things that are beautiful, and then we have the things that on the fringe that kind of make things a little ugly at times. But there's a lot of beauty in this country, in this world, and I believe that works like your book and what you're doing do help add light and beauty in the world, and that's what you're supposed to do as a Freemason and as a person, and whether you're a Catholic, a Christian, or whether you don't follow religion, or whether you're a Muslim, it doesn't matter. We're all supposed to be good people and represent ourselves and our families, and you're definitely doing that. And your book is hitting the shelves February
11.
And we're not going to release this podcast till then, right?
Oh, okay, sure.
Well, it's up to you. I'll leave that up to you.
No, that's good. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So what I could do is just release it at that time, and I'll cut this part out of it at the end. And
okay.
Where can everybody find your great work? First, your website, and then also your book.
Yeah, well, so the book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think you can even get it through Target, and so it's really accessible. Or they can get it straight from the publisher's website, Inner Traditions. So those will be the easiest ways to get it. And my website is just my name, angelmillar.com.
Great. And what's next for you, Angel? Are you going to go ahead and promote this book and just be involved in Freemasonry for the next year, or do you have planned another book?
Well, I've already nearly written another book, and I'm constantly writing, so I'm probably a bit of a workaholic, actually. And but it's very similar kind of theme to this one, or at least touches on it. But who knows? That's the future. No one knows what that holds. But yeah, I'm certainly going to be writing. I'm giving quite a few talks this year. Speaking at Masonic Con in Massachusetts and Masonic Con in Cooperstown in New York. I'll be speaking in LA and New Jersey, and Esoteric Con in Virginia, and probably some other places as well. Other than that, I'll be practicing martial arts and doing my usual practices. Let me just add that Freemasonry isn't a huge part of it. It's really in the first section on the craftsman, where I look also at alchemy and Kabbalah and Islamic Neoplatonism. And then there's a whole section on the martial arts and the warrior. But this is the first book that I've really explored the realms of modern occultism, from Eliphas Levi to Crowley and chaos magic, and I look at sex magic and tantra and all kinds of things as well. So it's definitely quite a different book for me, but it's kind of developed.
Yeah, we only touched on about 5 different concepts and subjects. I mean, I had like 20 more here I could have talked about, and we could have talked for 5 hours. And that's why people need to get the book to understand it, right? So please get the book, go on Amazon, support Angel, and go to these conferences and support him and his fellow Masons. Thank you for your time, Angel. I really appreciate you, brother.
Oh, likewise. Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome. Take care.